Again, thanks for the introduction, Gwen. And thank you all for your time. So just to give you a very quick overview of a little bit about me and where I'm coming from, it's important to know I am not a subject matter expert in CSDR. My work and my practice is really in regenerative business design and using creativity and play to come up with new solutions. So today I'm coming to this conversation through the perspective of thinking about how I work with my clients and how CSRD, which I will give you some overview into, and then of course materiality is likely to impact them. I typically work with business leaders who are actually frustrated with checkbox sustainability. They're overwhelmed by complex frameworks and regulations and the ever-evolving landscape that's happening, but they know that they're going to need fundamental shifts both in their operations and their thinkings if they are going to sustain a commercially successful business in a changing climate. So I use, as I mentioned before, games and play to help their teams unlock imagination and ideas and reimagine maybe how business and their offering can contribute to a healthier, safer, and brighter future for all life. So I think it's important just to center that in terms of if you have questions, I will do my very best to answer them. But this is not a deep dive into CSRD and materiality. It's really for us to play and figure out what's happening in the space where we are, based on either whether you're a consultant or facilitator or a business owner or working with it within a company. So the structure of today is going to ask you all a question, what your particular questions are around the topic. So that I'm going to use to guide me as much as possible as I go through a couple of slides. It will hopefully not be death by PowerPoint presentation, because who needs that in their life? But I do have some slides just to help guide me talking to you for a little while. And then we will figure out what the emergent question is. And we're going to take that one question into breakout rooms where you will then have a conversation amongst yourselves around this topic. There's no right or wrong. Again, it's just let's see what's coming up for everybody. And then we're going to come back into the group and discuss it together. And the hope is that by the end of this session, we'll have a little bit more understanding of the relationship of materiality to this new legislation, but also what type of support, what type of new learning, where we go from here, dependent on what it is we do. Does that sound okay, fair, all that stuff? I, of course, can't see anyone, so thumbs up if that's cool. Fabulous. Right, and again, if there is anybody with more knowledge, at the conversation at the end is certainly where we will go into. Please share. So to begin, I'd really like you to add your questions to the chat. So anything that you want to know about materiality, about CSRD, you've got 2 minutes to just have a think, and we will use that to guide the rest of the conversation. Gwen, will you keep time on those 2 minutes? I've got you, Noah. I can definitely deliver that. Okay. Great. I love a how question, Damien, and a why question. Is that everybody? Gwen, how are we doing on time?
We've got another few seconds, but I think we could probably see more coming in.
Okay.
So another 5 or 10 seconds if people are still typing, but I think that's probably where we're at. Over to you, Khandiz.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for all the questions. And turns out there are lots of technical questions. So let me give it a go. Right, I'm just closing the chat because there's lots of stuff going on. So CSRD, to your question, Alan, is going to replace NFRD. So that is the non-financial reporting disclosures. And that means it will significantly expand on the number of companies required to report. So under NFRD, there were about 11,700 companies that needed to report on impacts. And the CSRD eventually will have approximately 50,000 that will require mandatory reporting. So what's in scope? Well, it will be large European companies. So that's either listed or non-listed companies. You'll see on the dates there, I've got 24, 25. So anybody who was already having to report under NFRD had to report at the beginning of this year. And new large European companies will have to start reporting from January 2025. Listed entities in the European regulated market are also going to have to report. So that's going to affect SMEs, but not micro entities. And that's from 2026, but they have an opportunity to opt out from 2020 until 2028. I apologize. And then finally, non-EU companies that are generating more than 150 million within the EU and or with at least one EU branch or subsidiary that generates more than 40 million will have to report by 2028. Very quickly, just for what is a large company, it means that there is a net turnover of more than 40 million euros, a balance sheet of more than 20 million, and they have more than 250 employees on average in a year. But this is where the thinking starts of, even though these are the companies that fall within scope, smaller companies may not have to report, but there will be pressure both from stakeholders and their supply chain to deliver a lot of this other information. And this is where there's this ripple and trickle down effect that I'm curious to think about here. So hopefully that's answered a good few of the questions so far that were asked. So what are the things that are being introduced through the CSRD? Standardized reporting format. So it's going to require companies to submit sustainability data in a standardized digital format. And this is meant to allow for easier checking and comparison of data across companies. These large in-scope companies are going to have to get third-party assurance. So sustainability data will be subjected to limited third-party assurance, meaning an external auditor will have to validate and verify what's being put forward. So this, of course, adds an independent check on accuracy of the reports. They're also bringing in detailed disclosure. So this is where they'll be using the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, or the ESRSs, to implement and provide the rules and the details for reporting on sustainability impacts, opportunities, and risks. And this level of specificity is supposedly going to help ensure comprehensive and accurate reporting. So again, this for me is a really interesting one. I've started reading into the SERSs. So you've got 2 cross-cutting SERSs, 1 and 2, and those sort of tell you what and how and why. And then you've got 10 ESG ERSs that will give you a bit of a breakdown. I saw someone mention what was scope 1, 2, and 3. How does that align? So ESR, let's see if I can remember all these in order. I'll be as quick as I can. ESRSE1 is climate change, and it's gross emissions that will need to be reported for scope 1, 2, and 3. Then there is pollution. That is going to cover soil pollution, air pollution, water pollution, ozone depleting substances, and microplastics. Then we move on to ESRESE3, which is water and marine resources. Again, how much water is being used, what's being stored, what's running off into rivers and the ocean. Then we move on to biodiversity and ecosystems. And then finally, still under that E category, we move on to resource use and circular economy. And then we move into the S's. So that will be own workers, workers in the supply chain, affected communities, customers, consumers, and users of products. And then onto G, which is sort of how your company is being governed. So what are we, business conduct, essentially. So that's the summary of the ESRSs. And then there are some sector level ones, which I have not done the reading in, so I'm not even going to pretend to rattle them off. But key thing that's coming out here is the CSRD is using this double materiality. And I'm going to go into some slides in a bit with a bit more information. But this goes into what is known as impact materiality and takes away, so traditional single materiality is financial materiality. Companies have been having to present these reports for years, but now we're going into this impact piece, and it's becoming mandatory. And I think there's some great things about it, and there's some potential problems that could arise from it, because the guidance basically says the organization itself is required to self-determine what needs to go in there. And the other key thing that's coming out of it is not only are you reporting on the impacts from your operations, products, and services, but also throughout your value chain. And this, again, is going to become really comprehensive with scope 3 and possibly challenging getting a lot of the information from the supply chain to have accurate stuff. So I'm interested to see how this all plays out. There's definitely more complexity, more data to find, but also nice to see that there is thinking of what mechanisms we have to start getting better quality data and consistent data across these big organizations. There's also then integration with financial reporting. So sustainability information must be included in management reports alongside any financial data. And again, this is to encourage the same level of effort and care and rigor that goes into reporting our finances should go into reporting impacts. There are potential penalties for organizations that are required to report and don't, and the penalties will vary depending on country. And then finally, regular audits, excuse me, is they want regular audits of sustainability data to ensure accuracy over a period of time. Right, so the big question, what is materiality? Essentially, it is a topic that is important or significant enough to influence decisions. In the context of CSRD, it's important or significant enough either to the financial security of the business or the impacts of the business on people and nature to include in these reports to talk about it. And again, I think it's still one of the questions that came out is how, why, where, but materiality is binary. So something is either material or not. You're either going to report on it or not. So how do we figure out what is truly relevant? And this for me is where I'm hoping the conversation today will go, if it's useful to yourselves as well. Because when we are dealing with dynamic systems, with societies, with nature, they're not binary. There are gray areas. There are more value-based decisions. And this is where I'm curious around if this approach, this mandated approach to report, is still really just reinforcing this idea of financial viability rather than how do we shift and change organizations so that they are actually fit for the future. I don't know the answers to any of these, but this again is what keeps coming up as I'm digging deeper. The guidance does say that this double materiality should not be a reporting initiative. It's a strategic initiative, but I don't know if there is yet enough understanding or support to possibly make sure that we're getting data that matters. I'm sure you've all heard the expression, you can't manage what you don't measure. But there's another one that says if you don't measure what you value, you only value what you measure. And I think this is some of the concern coming up around, could this unintentionally lead to that? Right, on to the next slide. So today I'm going to cover 4 lenses of materiality, but for clarity, the CSRD really only looks at you covering double materiality. So that is financial materiality and impact materiality. But I want to bring in these other lenses just to extend the conversation. Right, so as it suggests, there's 2 lenses that overlap. Financial materiality takes an outside-in look. How are factors emerging in the world? How are climate change, water use, dissatisfied customers, unhappy people, aging populations, how are they impacting on the business's financial sustainability? Impact materiality takes an inside-out look. Like I mentioned earlier, it gets you to understand what impacts, positive or negative, actual or perceived, could happen through your operations, through your products, services, and value chain on nature and people. We've got to think about, when do we expect these issues to emerge? Is it short-term, medium, or long-term? So there's an overlap with how financial materiality is conducted. And we also need to think about, is this impact already happening, or could it happen in the future? How serious could this impact be? And is it helpful or harmful? And the thing about this reporting exercise, and I know this is probably nobody in this room is doing this on a massive scale, although I did see there was somebody who had done a few of these double materialities, but the expanding out from GRI, so the Global Reporting Initiative, double materiality is included there. There are a couple of initiatives that are using this framework, but ESRS and CSRD, alphabet soup, is really extending out the level of detail, the quality assurance of the data that you're reporting on. And it's just becoming this like data tsunami. But let's see where it goes. Okay, so very quickly, I'll give you a rundown of the concept of triple materiality, also known as context-based materiality. Brings in this third lens of where are these issues happening? Now, context-based materiality was first presented in 2019, and I did a very bad job of referencing because I can't remember the guy's name, but I'll come back to you on that. And it really sort of says, can we think about the thresholds and societal norms, the planetary thresholds and societal norms in relationship to impact and financial reporting? How might changing views and stronger expectations for responsible behavior affect whether impacts are acceptable or not in the future? And then there is a fourth one, I kid you not very well known yet, and it's called quadruple materiality or ethical materiality. And this is a concept presented by a man named Richard Hardiment. And if anybody is really interested in business data, he's written a fantastic book called Measuring Good Business, which I highly recommend. I've learned a lot from it. But this really fundamentally says, this lens goes, so you've got your context, your financial, but value-based, ethical, moral decisions as to why something is included in you talking about it and sharing it supersedes whether it's a financial risk or opportunity or there's shareholder expectation to hear about it, but because it's fundamentally the right thing to do. So what I'm going to do very quickly before we go into the emergent questions is just come back to the chat. I think we're doing okay on time, aren't we, Gwyn?
Yeah, you've got about 1.5 minutes.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Was there anything that I could that I didn't cover there, or can we get into that later if you want to pop that in the chat? Okay, so we've got, not sure if this is correct. CSRD is a mandate within the EU. Why is it not replicated in the UK? Do you see anything similar coming up in the UK? Mohit, not, there is SECA, so it's more around climate reporting. But I think there will be a trickle-down effect. I don't know of any legislation that's similar to CSRD, but this is going to have global impacts fundamentally, regardless of the size of the business. How can companies leverage existing assessments and use them to report? How can they actually develop insights from these existing? I think that's a great question, Meki. Maybe that's something we can take forward as this emergent question. My question that I propose here is this type of top-down pressure, this legislation, going to have the intended outcomes? So the intended outcomes is that through radical transparency, businesses will shift their behavior. So I'm going to pose that to you to go and have that conversation together in the breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. Again, we don't have a huge amount of time, so please don't introduce yourself, as unfriendly as that seems. Just get to the question, and choose one person who will come out and share for 1 minute the perspectives that came out of the group. Is everybody clear on that? Can't see any thumbs up. But...
So if everyone's got the question, what we're going to be doing is putting you into rooms of about 3 to 4 people, and you have 10 minutes to discuss the questions, and then come back and one nominated speaker summarize, and then we'll have a bigger conversation where we can dive into all the questions that Candice couldn't cover in the time. If that's okay, Candice, we can start now. Okay.
Is everybody clear? That's okay. I just want to make sure everybody's clear on the question.
Yeah, sorry, could you just just clarify the question one more time?
How do we feel if this mandated approach is going to have the intended outcome that the CSRD thinks it's going to have? And that is that radical transparency of data from these large listed companies, or certainly big earners fundamentally will have the effect that it's going to change business behavior for the better.
Okay, so is that like kind of discussing the carrot versus the stick approach, almost, of it's on the one hand they're being mandated, but on the flip side, if it was more voluntary, would we get a different response? Is that where you're angling from, or?
I'm not angling from anything. I think that's a perfect example of like what other questions come out of this. Is it a carrot and stick approach? Is it still too focused in the financial application? You know, is it reinforcing the same system? I think that's a play with it. I mean, there's no definitive outcome. We want to see what emerges and what people's concerns are and readiness are. I will share it, Theodora, in the chat when I'm finished speaking. I'll make sure I type it out. I'm just not very good at talking and typing.
Okay, well, I think you better get on with that, Khandiz.
Sure.
And we will there'll be 4 rooms, and it's randomly assigned. So hopefully you enjoy the company you're in. And I'll open the rooms now, and you have 10 minutes. Okay, so we get back at about
just
12
invite
minutes.
The first group's person to share what came out of their discussion.
I drew the short straw there. I suppose the conversation in reality, we had no consensus. It was more asking the question in different ways, really, to a certain extent. One of the comments was that by having these requirements, it may help to place value on different things, and that and questioning whether or not trying to place these reporting requirements on organizations in a similar way, which is what the question originally stated, in a similar way as the actual financial reporting, is actually going to make a difference. With the only, given what we've seen in so many organizations recently, let's say on ESG reporting, who've been doing the reporting for years and then pulled back on most of their pledges or whatever, because they realized they couldn't do them, or they didn't fall squarely within their mandates, we'll put it, once funding got tight, or their market started to suffer in some way. And whether or not the only real potential to impact that is the stakeholders, the customers, the investors who might be interested in it, but the customers and then employees, for instance, who are expecting something different, particularly younger employees, younger consumers, expecting something different from the companies that they either work for or buy from. That may cause executives to perhaps think that we need to do more than just put an effort into reporting, and we need to look at what that reporting yields.
Thank you. Who's the next group? We're going to come back to these, Damien. So we'll have this discussion in more detail.
Yeah, hi. So Damien, thank you so much for beginning the discussion, with all of us, and for starting it. And I was in room 2 with Tracy and Margarita, and thank you so much, both of you, for your support there. Just wanted to share, we spoke more about a little about generic stuff, like in layman language. We understood, okay, why is sustainability important? So sustainability, we realized that it's not always about green trees, but it's about people, planet, profit. So that's why ESG was coined. And so environmental, social, and governance metrics, all 3 come under sustainability. So if people don't want to work for your company, your business will not be sustainable. If your suppliers are not happy with you, or your customers are not happy with you, your supply chain will be affected. Your business will not be sustainable. So profits are dependent on environmental and social factors, for sure. So from there, we kind of came about in terms of how regulations such as CSRD, like what we feel that how such mandated approach can, help build transparency, and and to what effect. So we were thinking that there are three kinds of organizations, and the first is like who are like really want to spearhead this positive impact towards people, planet, profit. And then the second are who want to, but they don't know how to. They would like some guidance. And the third are really organizations who might be large 15,000, 20,000, 80,000 people companies, but they don't care and about sustainability. And so something like CSRD brings everybody in line, benefits organizations that have been trying to spearhead such actions, helps organizations build some self-guided sort of approach, which is the type 2. And for type 3, it builds a mandate for them so that their progress towards sustainability can be measured. And and yeah, and I think like all three of us, we've realized that yes, a mandate like this would bring not just transparency, but help them benchmark and track their progress year on year, which will eventually impact their business positively. So in that way, yes, we're for CSRD. So
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Who's next?
Miki, I don't know if you or I should do it. We didn't agree who was going to chat in our group, but I'm happy to do it.
Go ahead, please. Yeah, I'm happy to.
Well, yeah. So me, Miki, Liesel, and Theodora, in our group, we were slightly split. So sort of Theodora was of the belief that the compliance was 100% the right way to go. I think we all agreed as a baseline that's right, and it will force companies to do the right thing. But I think the rest of us were like, that should be the starting place for companies, is the compliance bit. And if they look at CSRD as an opportunity to move their business forward in a really positive way, it's such a great opportunity to engage with a much larger range of stakeholders than they previously would have done. And that will improve their stakeholder engagement. That could potentially improve their future uptake of new business, and yeah, put them on a sort of good stepping for the long run. The other thing that we then discussed was the impact of the CSRD coming down the line, because the CSRD is just reporting at the end of the day. So yes, finance and impact reporting, but what's actually mandating and making these companies make an impact and a change on the ground. And the CSRD doesn't do that. It's just reporting. So that's why the CSRD, hopefully, and I don't understand enough about it, but my understanding or our understanding was that will then force companies to do correct due diligence on how they should adapt their operations to then fall in line with the impacts that they've seen or called out as material from the CSRD. Yeah, anything else, Miki, that I may have missed out?
Miki, did you want to add something?
No, I think that's a good summary. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. And are there any other groups?
Yeah.
There's room 4.
Fabulous.
Which is myself and Jennifer and Hosea, and very similar to what Nick said there in regards to what impact it has on the behavior of the organization and how it engages with people. Talked about the effect that it has on the C-suite and the stakeholders. Scope 3 was sort of a big part of the discussion, and that's just like the previous kinds of regulation. Scope 3 is still the hugely difficult part. And a concern within that is that it is aimed at the very big primes, and they may well have the funds for multiple layers of auditing. But of course, if you're an SME as a supplier in the chain to that prime, you will have to have the same level of auditing to comply to the same regulation, even though you don't have the employee level to have it affect you. If you want to be part of the supply chain, then you're still going to have to do that. And the pricing for all of those services to do with audits and compliance will be priced at prime level. And so they will need more funds, and the training will have to be available as it is today with yourself, Khandiz. But yes, there'll be a lot of work to do further down the supply chain to support people to be able to continue to be stakeholders and suppliers.
Well, thank you everybody for those summaries. Before we sort of really just deepen that discussion a bit, is there anybody else that wants to add anything? Please just jump in, because I can't see all your faces at once.
I suppose, if I may, Alan, thanks for that. Can I respond very quickly? Just from my recent experience of, on a client project working on the CSRD, and my background is human rights due diligence, where you really need to go deep into what is happening, where, very context-based, etc. That my understanding of what CSRD asks for is not that depth. So it's, as a reporting requirement, it's engaging stakeholders, and the wider the better, and the more balanced the better, to understand what is material and what isn't material. But I think what you're talking about speaks to me more of human rights due diligence, and that might come in with a CSRD more. That's my two pennies.
Thank you so much. It's really helpful to sort of hear from an experiential point of view as well. One thing I did find out while I was reading into all of this is actually there is no, you don't have to consult stakeholders. There is an expectation, but you are not actually complied to consult your stakeholders in CSRD, which seems a bit nuts, but it does then go to the responsibility of the organization. And I think that's going to be interesting, because there's not a lot of places that do great stakeholder expectation. And Meki, as you've just sort of identified in the human rights, you've really got to dig down. It has to be, we're dealing with people and care and well-being and safety. And so if it's too surface layer, I think it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of it. I found that very interesting, again, that there's not an overall consensus as to if this approach is going to be as useful as it is intended. I've come across CSDDD, but I've not done the same level of reading on it, so don't have too much to add on that, to be honest. But I guess it's really from these, what I heard certainly coming out of this conversation is that people make up organizations. Without people, without caring about people, without nature and resources that we rely on, when everything gets reduced down to numbers, because it's really about the financial success, the long-term financial success of an organization, that there is a lot of confusion. I also heard that we need a lot more support and resources. I see there is a message from Tracy in the chat around sole traders and limited time and funds. And earlier on, there was a question as well around how do we balance the time and resources of having to report, whether it's CSRD or any other kind of reporting, and actually running the business. And I don't know yet that this additional complexity and level of data, or certainly I'm not convinced yet that this is going to get us there. Yes, there's definitely benefits of being able to compare Apple to Apple and not Apple to Amazon when we're looking at the information, because I think one of the trouble with ESG itself, and again, if you're interested in metrics, definitely have a read of Richard Hardiman's book on Measuring Good Business. The history of ESG and sustainability reporting is fascinating. I found out that the first technical sustainability report was actually written in 1654, when, I could have that date wrong, when the Dutch East India Company ship shipwrecked off the coast of South Africa. Now, I'm South African, so that's a big deal for me. But that was actually when the first sustainability report was prepared. Totally off topic, but the point was, the history that's come out is it's not until the 80s actually that and the early 2000s that ESG became around this concept of you're going to be financially profitable if you do good, rather than values were always part of decision making for the long history of business that's very often not spoken about. Anybody else want to contribute any thoughts on that, now that I'm just rambling because I'm getting nervous talking to myself again? No. Go ahead, America.
I think that was a mistake.
Oh God. Come on, I was like, some support here in the conversation.
No,
Okay.
that was honestly a mistake. Please go ahead.
No, not a problem. What kind of, certainly from your own perspectives, and bearing in mind as we trickle down to smaller and smaller businesses, Alan, I think you brought it up around scope 3 is going to be a big problem, trying to get that information and provide that information. The conversation has been quite, how do we get it? But actually, how do we put the mechanisms in place to provide it? And is it going to be material to this small company that's having to deliver it? What are thoughts around what type of support and education will be required?
I can comment on that if that's okay.
Please.
Okay. So I'm the sustainability officer for a small SME, but it's a small SME that trades with or is part of the chain of large primes, and the simple cost of sorting out ISOs and B Corp, £500 to apply, even for B Corp, then £1,000 a year. So there is an awful high price tag on sustainability. If you want to be completely ESG and sustainability compliant currently, there is a lot to spend. Just to have the right logos, badges, certifications, stamps, all those kind of things, which the primes cannot trade with you unless you've got that. And this adds another, but this one seems to add one. Well, it adds one, and it includes various types of auditing. My concern is that every time we add a new thing, we create a new market for people to be able to charge for making sure that you pass that level. And I really don't expect there is going to be a very charitable organization that comes along and makes all of that free for us anytime soon, because there's money to be made higher up in the primes. So we'd love to be totally compliant in every possible way. In fact, we'd love the primes to come and visit us, because they'll find that actually the way that we're doing things is better than the way that they're doing things when it comes to compliance. But it's the costs of these regulations, and the more layers we have, the more times you have to pay. And it would be nice if government or something like it started to subsidize some of this and put some money in place, so that, you know, we're not the worst off financially as an SME. There are others in other countries who are trying to survive in the open market of selling sustainable products, who have a lot less money. Just the simple fact of exchange rates and value between different countries. So there just needs to be efforts made to level the playing field so that all supply chains can become sustainable.
Thank you for sharing that, Gwyn.
Yeah, we've just run up to the time limit. So thanks,
time.
Alan. Do you want to wrap up now, Khandiz?
Yes, I'll wrap up and say, well, first of all, thank you all for your time and contribution. I'm happy to stay on for a little while longer if we've got any other questions to chat. So from my side, if we've got more questions that need to be addressed, I'm more than happy to chat. But to summarize, for this to really work, small businesses within the supply chain are going to need subsidies, funding to meet the requirements that are coming down the line. I also think that there is a lot because this is so new, as Alan mentioned, there's going to be, of course, a lot of people popping up and going, oh, we auditors and stuff, but it's such a new field that I think there's also a lot of learning that can be done. We're in this like radical learning phase, which is, we've got to acknowledge that and accept that everybody's learning at the same time. So these conversations and opinions and hearing where people are at is really useful. That certainly as ASP or part of ASP and some of the games that I've been designing of how we can support in an engaging way to get the stuff done because it matters and not just because of compliance.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks very much, people. Mohit, you raised your hand. Did you want to quickly say something?
Yeah, just a very brief comment to Alan's point and to Khandiz's point as well. So very recently, Microsoft, a very large organization, right? They put out this mandate for all of their suppliers, and those are like hundreds of thousands of suppliers, to get their GHG data, all their carbon data, third-party verified. Now, most of them did not even have their carbon data in place. Now, large organizations will go to these extents to manage their scope 3 data, scope 3 emissions. So I believe that the onus should also be on them to kind of provide that support, financial plus legislative support to the smaller suppliers to be able to, fulfill that mandate as well. Because after July 31st, which was the deadline, many of those suppliers who have not been able to submit the report are delisted by Microsoft until further notice. So this is I think crucial for larger organizations alongside governments, of course, to also take the initiative and have some onus upon themselves. Yeah.
Super valuable. Thank you, Mohit. Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, and a very important one that we have to address. It affects both sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you totally eliminate your whole supply chain because they're not complying because they're too small to, you're not going to have a supply chain, are we?
Yeah, it's like a bad boy behavior where Microsoft knows that they are the bread and butter. So the smaller ones will have to comply, sort of thing. But yeah, thank you so much, Khandiz. This was really helpful.
Good. I'm pleased to hear it. And thank you for participating and listening and asking questions. There was one question I did come across. I'm not sure who asked it and if they are still here, but what struck me is what are we already doing that can feed into this kind of reporting? If you are doing scope 1, 2, and 3 across your entire supply chain, that's already one start. I definitely, if you're doing your ISO environmental management system well, you will have a lot of this data. And I think it really comes down to the processes and procedures and things that an organization has in place, because like we're seeing with scope 1, 2, and 3 data, if you're only collecting the smallest part of scope 3, because this is what you're being told to collect, we're not getting a full picture anyway. So making sure that you have good system tools, technologies in place to collect data would be a good start to make sure that it matters. Like it goes back to the word material, that it matters. If you're going to collect this data, it should matter, and we should be able to do something with it rather than it's just this exercise to collect data and then nothing happens.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to close the recording now.